Ethan Carwell stood at the kitchen counter, carefully spreading peanut butter onto a slice of whole wheat toast, but his mind was elsewhere, running through key points for his upcoming presentation at the Marine Biology Conference. The quiet hum of the refrigerator added a calming background as he absent-mindedly reached for a jar of homemade strawberry jam. He paused briefly, frowning, when he realized he had forgotten to take his laptop out of sleep mode. His slides for the talk on the impact of microplastics on local marine ecosystems were still only partially completed. Glancing at his watch, Ethan reassured himself he still had time. The sound of footsteps descending the stairs grabbed his attention as Olivia entered the kitchen, her heels tapping rhythmically on the tiled floor. There was something off about her today. Her shoulder-length brown hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless. She wore a crisp white blouse and a pencil skirt that hugged her figure more tightly than usual for a standard day at her real estate office. "Morning, honey," Ethan greeted, raising an eyebrow at her unusual outfit. Olivia flashed a smile, but it seemed a bit too bright. "Good morning. What a gorgeous day, isn't it?" she chirped. Ethan nodded, puzzled by her enthusiasm. It wasn't even 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Olivia didn't typically describe mornings as beautiful before her first cup of coffee. "Oh, by the way," Olivia said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "my boyfriend, Chase, is outside. I think it's about time you two meet." Ethan froze mid-bite, the toast suspended in his hand. He blinked, sure he had misheard. "Wait, what?" Olivia rolled her eyes, as though Ethan was being deliberately slow. "My boyfriend, Chase. He's outside in his car. Don't be rude, come on." In a daze, Ethan moved to the window, and sure enough, there was a sleek Tesla Model S parked in their driveway, its metallic surface gleaming in the early sunlight. The sight made his stomach churn, reality crashing down. "Olivia," Ethan began, his voice low and controlled, despite the turmoil inside. "What on earth is happening?" Olivia waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. Chase and I have been seeing each other for a while now." "I figured it was time to be open about it." Ethan felt as though he'd been punched. 15 years of marriage, and this was how it ended, over a casual conversation at breakfast. "You can't be serious," he managed to say, struggling to hold his emotions in check. This is madness." Olivia's cheerful demeanor hardened suddenly. "Well, if you're going to make this difficult, I'll leave with Chase right now. Your call." The ultimatum hung heavy between them, and Ethan's world felt like it was shifting, everything he knew about his marriage and his life disintegrating. But somewhere inside, a spark of anger flared, burning away the shock and pain. "If you walk out that door," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm, "our marriage is over. 15 years, Olivia. Are you really willing to throw it all away for a brief moment?" Uncertainty flickered in Olivia's eyes, a flash of regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She snatched her purse from the counter, her movements sharp and decisive. "I guess I am," she said coldly. Ethan stood motionless as Olivia walked to the front door, her hand hovering over the knob, as if expecting him to stop her. When he remained silent, she opened the door and stepped into the sunlight. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the house, its finality deafening. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, still holding the half-eaten toast, as the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. His wife had just left him for another man, delivering the news with the emotional weight of someone announcing they were going to the store. Ethan's legs felt weak, and he stumbled to a chair, collapsing into it as his mind raced. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, a reminder that the world outside was continuing, even though his had just come to a halt. The aquarium was bustling with activity as Ethan entered through the staff entrance, nodding mechanically at the security guard, his mind still caught in a loop, replaying the events of the morning. As he walked past the tropical fish exhibit, the vibrant colors of the fish seemed dull, as if all the life had been drained from the world. He barely noticed the excited chatter of schoolchildren pressing against the glass, pointing at a particularly colorful parrotfish. In his office, Ethan sat before his computer screen, staring blankly at the unfinished presentation on microplastics. The weight of his personal crisis made it impossible to concentrate on work. His phone buzzed persistently, and with a sinking feeling, Ethan glanced at the screen. A series of texts from Olivia lit up the display. "I want half of everything," one read. "My lawyer will contact you. Don't think you can cheat me, Ethan. I know about your finances, and if you try to hide anything, I'll take you for all you've got." A wave of nausea rolled through him. The woman he had once loved, with whom he had built a life, was now threatening him like an enemy. Unable to face it any longer, Ethan placed the phone screen down on his desk. A soft knock on his office door jolted him from his dark thoughts. Dr. Maya Patel, a colleague and friend, peeked into the room. "Ethan, are you okay?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ethan attempted a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "Maya? I don't even know where to start." Maya stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. She sat across from him, her dark eyes filled with concern. What happened? The words poured out of Ethan in a rush, recounting Olivia, Chase, and the bizarre breakfast conversation that had destroyed his marriage. As he spoke, Maya's expression shifted from concern to shock, then to something else, guilt. When he finished, Maya was silent for a long time. Finally, with a deep sigh, she said, "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I should have told you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked. Maya couldn't meet his gaze. I knew about Olivia. I saw her a few times with a man I didn't recognize. They seemed close, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to cause trouble if I was wrong." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "You knew, and you didn't tell me?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Maya replied. "I should have said something, but I couldn't bring myself to potentially destroy your marriage if I was mistaken." Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling as though the wind had been knocked out of him. "Who else knew?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Maya hesitated before answering. "I think others might have noticed something. There were whispers, you know how it is around here, but no one wanted to be the one to tell you." Almost as if on cue, Ethan became aware of the glances being directed at him through the glass walls of his office, sympathetic looks and hushed conversations that abruptly ended whenever he glanced up. The humiliation burned inside him, spreading through his chest. How long had this been happening? How long had he been the oblivious fool, while everyone around him seemed to know the truth? Before he could sink further into his thoughts, his phone rang. It was the emergency line for the Sea Turtle Rescue Program. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and answered the call. Work, he could still focus on that. It was the only thing he had left. When Ethan returned home later that evening, the house was disturbingly quiet. He stood in the entryway, keys still in his hand, surveying the scene before him. It looked like the place had been hit by a highly selective tornado. Drawers had been yanked open, their contents scattered on the floor, and the spots where Olivia's favorite decorative pieces had stood were now conspicuously bare. In the living room, the antique vase, a wedding gift from his grandmother, was missing from its prominent spot on the mantel. Dread rising within him, Ethan made his way to the bedroom. The closet door stood wide open, and Olivia's side had been cleaned out. Her jewelry box was gone, along with the framed family photos that had once adorned her nightstand. Ethan sank heavily onto the bed, his head in his hands. The reality of the situation was finally settling in. This wasn't just a fight, or Olivia blowing off steam. She was truly gone. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his daze. It was an unfamiliar number. Mr. Caldwell, a professional voice, inquired when he answered. "This is Sandra from Coastal Credit Union's fraud department. We've noticed some unusual activity on your joint account with Olivia Caldwell. There have been several large withdrawals and some international charges. We're calling to verify if these transactions were authorized." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "No," he croaked, his voice hoarse. "No, they're not authorized. What exactly has been happening with the account?" As Sandra detailed the transactions, Ethan felt a cold fury building within him. Olivia hadn't just left him, she had drained their joint accounts. Their savings were gone, and their shared credit cards were maxed out. After ending the call, Ethan sat in stunned silence for a few moments, then suddenly sprang into action. He rushed to his home office. He needed to secure whatever assets he had left and assess the full extent of the damage Olivia had caused. As he rifled through files and old statements, a folder labeled Old Work Projects caught his eye, something he had never paid much attention to before. Now, with suspicion creeping in, he opened it. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold. Questionable real estate deals, properties sold for far less than market value to shell companies, inflated commissions. It was all there in black and white, a paper trail of fraud that Olivia had orchestrated right under his nose. Ethan's hands shook as he reached for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and paused on a name he hadn't called in years: Zoe Caldwell, his sister, a corporate lawyer in New York. They had grown distant over time, both busy with their own lives. But now he needed her. The phone rang 3 times before Zoe answered. Her voice was surprised but warm. "Ethan, it's been a while. Is everything okay?" Ethan's voice cracked as he replied, "Zoe, I need your help. Everything's falling apart." Over the next hour, Ethan explained the whole ordeal to his sister Olivia's betrayal, the financial devastation, and the evidence of fraud he had uncovered. Zoe listened in shocked silence, only interrupting to ask for clarification when needed. "Jesus, Ethan," she said when he finished. "I'm so sorry. This is a mess, but listen to me, okay? We're going to fix this. I'm going to help you." For the first time since that awful morning, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this. He had someone on his side. He had a chance to fight back. As the night wore on, Ethan and Zoe devised a plan, a legal strategy, steps to manage the financial fallout, and actions to protect him from Olivia's fraudulent schemes. With each decision they made, each plan they put in place, Ethan felt a little stronger, a little more in control. By the time they ended the call, the first rays of dawn were creeping through the windows. Ethan stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and walked to the kitchen. He brewed a pot of strong black coffee and stood by the window, sipping it slowly. The world outside looked the same as always. The neighbor's cat prowled through the garden, and birds were beginning their morning songs, but for Ethan, everything had changed. The man who had woken up the previous morning, trusting and naive, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone determined, someone who wasn't going to let Olivia's betrayal break him. As he watched the sunrise, Ethan made a vow to himself. He would reclaim his life. He would find a way to move forward, and he would make sure that Olivia and her boyfriend Chase didn't escape the consequences of what they had done. In her dimly lit office, Norrin sat at her desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she delved deeper into the lives of Olivia Caldwell and Chase Blackwood. The private investigator had seen plenty of messy divorces and corporate espionage cases in her time, but something about this one made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had been hired by Ethan Caldwell's sister, Zoe, a sharp-tongued lawyer from New York, who had made it crystal clear that discretion was crucial. "My brother's been through enough," Zoe had said, her voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "I want everything you can dig up on these two, but it has to be rock solid. We can't afford any mistakes." Nora's eyes narrowed as she scrolled through pages of financial records, property documents, and court filings. Chase Blackwood's name appeared repeatedly, always skirting just on the edge of legality. Environmental violations that were quietly dismissed, bribery claims that vanished before reaching trial. "Gotcha, you sneaky devil," Nora muttered, a predatory grin forming as she uncovered plans for a massive resort development along the coast. The project would obliterate vital marine habitats, but the profits were staggering. She grabbed her phone, quickly dialing Zoe. "I found something your brother will definitely want to see." Across town, Ethan Caldwell sat at his desk at the aquarium, surrounded by piles of scientific journals and environmental reports. The dark circles under his eyes were proof of sleepless nights spent poring over data, channeling his pain and frustration into a meticulously detailed report. He had always known the local marine environment was fragile, but seeing the potential devastation laid out in hard data turned his stomach. Chase's resort wasn't just a threat to his personal life, it was an ecological disaster waiting to happen. Taking a deep breath, Ethan attached the report to an email, his cursor hovering over the send button before he finally clicked. The document was sent to a carefully selected list of environmental groups and journalists, all curated with the help of his colleagues. As he watched the sending animation, part of Ethan marveled at how swiftly he had adjusted to this cloak and dagger lifestyle. The trusting, naive man he had been just weeks ago now felt like a distant memory. His phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "Got those water quality reports you needed?" "Everything okay?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before typing back. Maya had been a pillar of support throughout this nightmare, but he hated involving her further in his problems. Still, he needed her expertise. "Thanks," he replied. "Busy with a project. I'll fill you in later." He had barely set the phone down when it buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Nora. "Mr. Caldwell." Her clipped voice came through the speaker. "I've uncovered some details about your wife's professional dealings that you'll want to see: insider trading, mishandling client funds." It's ugly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Each new revelation about Olivia felt like a fresh wound, reopening scars he had thought were starting to heal. "Send it over," he said, his voice strained. "And Nora, thank you." As he hung up, Ethan's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. He and Olivia, sun-kissed and laughing on their honeymoon in Bali. With a sudden surge of anger, he slammed the frame face down. The community centre buzzed with tension as residents filed in for the town hall meeting. Posters promoting Chase Blackwood's luxurious coastal resort were plastered on the walls, glossy images of infinity pools and pristine golf courses taunting the worried faces of the locals. Ethan slipped into a seat near the back, his heart pounding. He had swapped his usual button-down and khakis for a plain hoodie and jeans, intent on blending in with the crowd. In his bag, he clutched a folder filled with copies of his environmental impact report, every page a damning indictment of the proposed development. At the front of the room, Chase Blackwood cut a striking figure in his tailored suit, flashing a confident smile as he greeted local officials. Beside him, Olivia looked stunning in a red dress that likely cost more than Ethan's monthly salary. Seeing them together brought a fresh wave of pain, but he forced it down. He couldn't let emotions get in the way now. The meeting began with Chase's presentation, filled with lofty promises of job creation and economic growth. Ethan scanned the faces of his neighbors, seeing a mix of hope and doubt. He understood that for many, the prospect of jobs was a powerful draw. When the floor opened for questions, Ethan shot his hand up. The moderator nodded toward him, and he stood, palms sweaty but voice steady. "I've prepared a report on the environmental impact of this resort," Ethan began, pulling the folder from his bag. "According to my findings, the development would cause irreversible damage to local marine ecosystems, potentially leading to the extinction of several endangered species." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chase's smile wavered for a split second before he smoothly responded, "We've conducted extensive environmental assessments, I assure you." But Ethan was ready. He listed off statistics and sources, each point precise and methodical, his years of scientific training shining through. As he spoke, he saw the realization dawn on the faces around him. The threat this resort posed wasn't some abstract concept, it was a danger to their homes, their livelihoods, their entire way of life. Olivia, recognizing Ethan's voice, turned pale. Her eyes darted between her estranged husband and Chase, panic clear on her face. Chase, meanwhile, was struggling to maintain his composure, his once smooth rebuttals faltering under the weight of Ethan's well-researched arguments. As Ethan wrapped up his presentation, the room erupted into heated discussions. Outside, a commotion drew the crowd's attention toward the windows. A group of environmental activists, clearly tipped off about the meeting, had gathered with hastily made protest signs denouncing the resort. The meeting quickly descended into chaos as concerned citizens bombarded Chase and Olivia with questions they were woefully unprepared to answer. Ethan slipped away in the chaos, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and triumph. He was almost to his car when a hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around. Chase loomed large, his face flushed with anger. "You," Chase snarled, his usual suave demeanor shattered. "You're Olivia's ex. What on earth do you think 2126 you're doing?" Ethan stood his ground, fully aware of the smartphone cameras now trained on them. "I'm not doing anything wrong, Mr. Blackwood," he said calmly. "I'm a concerned citizen with relevant experience. Or, are you implying my personal life disqualifies me from public discourse?" Chase's grip tightened, his knuckles turning white. For a moment, Ethan thought he might actually throw a punch. But suddenly, Chase let go and stormed off, leaving Ethan shaken yet triumphant. As Ethan drove home, his phone buzzed non-stop with notifications. Someone had caught the altercation on video, and it was already circulating on social media. The comments largely sided with Ethan, portraying Chase as a bully trying to suppress a local scientist's concerns. Ethan allowed himself a small, grim smile. The tide was shifting. Across town, Maya Patel stared at her computer, her brows furrowed with worry. The local news site was filled with images from the town hall meeting, including an unflattering shot of 2234 Chase appearing to threaten Ethan. She minimized the browser as Ethan entered the lab, looking tired but oddly energized. "Quite a performance last night," she said in a neutral tone. "You okay?" Ethan nodded, sinking into his chair with a deep sigh. "Better than okay, actually. The story is gaining traction. I've already been contacted by 2 national news outlets wanting to interview me about the resort's environmental impact." Maya chewed on her lip, hesitating before speaking. "Ethan, I'm worried. This thing with Chase and Olivia, it's consuming you. Are you sure this is just about the environment?" Ethan's expression flashed between hurt and anger. "Of course it's about the environment. You've seen the data, Maya. If that resort gets built, it'll be an ecological disaster, I know, Maya said, raising her hands in a placating gesture. And I agree with you. But you have to admit, the personal aspect complicates things. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his face hardening. I need to take this, he said, stepping out of the lab. Maya watched him go, her heart heavy. She had known Ethan for years, seen him endure professional failures and personal grief with grace, but this was different. There was a hardness in him now, something that hadn't been there before. She turned back to her computer, refocusing on the sea turtle rescue program they were supposed to be working on. The personal drama would have to wait. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Olivia sat in her office, staring blankly at her computer screen. Her inbox was overflowing with worried emails from clients, each one feeling like another nail in her career's coffin. She jumped when her office door burst open, her assistant looking panicked. MS, Caldwell, the ethics board is here. They're demanding to see you immediately. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. What? Why something about an anonymous tip, allegations of insider trading and misuse of client funds? The room seemed to spin as Olivia gripped 2501, the edge of her desk, her mind racing. How did they find out? Who could have tipped them off? It had to be Ethan. As the ethics board members filed into her office with grim expressions, Olivia felt her carefully constructed life beginning to collapse. Across town, Chase Blackwood paced his luxurious office, phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean you can't secure the permits? He growled. I don't care what it takes. Just make it happen. He slammed the phone down, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The resort project was unraveling, investors spooked by the bad press and Olivia's drama. He glanced at his phone, 3 missed calls from Olivia in the last hour. He ignored them, as he had been doing for days. She was becoming a problem, and Chase Blackwood didn't tolerate liabilities. As the sun set over the city, Ethan found himself alone at the aquarium, long after most of his colleagues had gone. He stood before the giant tank housing the rescued sea turtles, watching them glide effortlessly through the water. Mr. Caldwell, a voice said, and Ethan turned to see Dr. Harriet Chin, the aquarium's director, approaching with a concerned look. Harriet. Ethan nodded, straightening up. Is everything okay, doctor? Chin sighed, her typically stern face softening. Ethan, we need to talk. Your work has been exemplary, as always, but I'm worried about the time you're spending on this fight against the Blackwood Resort. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Dr. Chin raised a hand. I understand your environmental concerns, I do, but you need to be careful about mixing personal grievances with professional duties. The aquarium can't afford to be seen as taking sides in what's turning into a very public and ugly conflict. The rebuke stung, but Ethan knew she was right. He had been treading a fine line, using his position to bolster his crusade against Chase and Olivia. I understand, he finally said. I'll be more careful. Dr. Chin nodded, satisfied. As she turned to leave, she paused. For what it's worth, Ethan, I'm sorry about what happened with Olivia. You deserved better. Left alone with the turtles, Ethan felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Zoe, it's me. I think I need some advice. As Ethan poured out his doubts and fears to his sister, the sea turtles swam gracefully behind him, their quiet strength a source of comfort. Despite the murky path ahead, filled with legal and moral challenges, Ethan was determined to persevere. Like the turtles, he would find his way through turbulent waters to calmer shores. In her office, Zoe Caldwell was hard at work, the room buzzing with the energy of a war room. Her desk was cluttered with financial reports, property deeds, and offshore bank statements. The New York skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but neither Zoe nor Ethan, who had flown in that morning, gave it a second glance. You're sure about this? Ethan asked, his voice low and tense, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Zoe nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up another document. Chase Blackwood's entire empire was built on deception. Look at this, Zoe said, turning the screen towards Ethan. Shell companies nested within other shell companies, all channeling money through a maze of offshore accounts. It's classic money laundering, and your wife is right in the middle of it. Ethan winced at the mention of Olivia. Even now, months after her betrayal, the pain was still fresh. Ex-wife, he corrected instinctively. Zoe's face softened briefly. Right, sorry, she muttered before, clearing her throat and regaining her composure. The real question is, what do we do with this information? Ethan's jaw tightened. We bring them all down. For a brief moment, Zoe saw something unsettling in her brother's eyes, a look she had never seen in the kind and gentle marine biologist she grew up with. She wondered, not for the first time, if she had made a mistake leading him down this path of revenge. But it was too late to turn back now. They were too far in. "I have contacts at the FBI and SEC," Zoe said, reaching for her phone. "But we'll need to be extremely careful about how we present this. Everything has to be by the book, or it could backfire." As Zoe made her calls, Ethan stared out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Chase and Olivia were living their lives, likely patting themselves on the back for how cleverly they had played him. The thought ignited a fury in his chest. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." "Please." Ethan's finger hovered over the delete button, but slowly, a plan started to take shape. Zoe interrupted her conversation. "I think I know how we can get the final piece of evidence." Across town, in a far less glamorous office, Olivia Caldwell stared at her phone. No response from Ethan. She fought back a wave of panic, her eyes scanning the dingy room she was now forced to work from. Her real estate license was suspended, her assets frozen, and Chase wasn't returning her calls. She was utterly alone, desperate and terrified. With trembling hands, she dialed Ethan's number again. This time he answered. "Ethan," she exhaled, relief flooding her. "Thank God. We need to talk, please." There was a long pause on the other end before Ethan's voice responded, cool and controlled. "All right, Olivia, let's talk." They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. As she hung up, a flicker of hope sparked within Olivia. Maybe, just maybe, she could salvage something from this disaster. Little did she know, she was walking straight into Ethan's trap. The cafe was nearly empty when Ethan arrived. He chose a booth at the back, positioning himself where he had a clear view of the entrance. His heart raced, but his hands were steady as he placed his phone on the table, the voice recorder app ready to capture every word. Olivia arrived 5 minutes later, and Ethan's breath hitched when he saw her. She looked smaller, diminished. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair, replaced by jeans and a plain blouse. There were lines on her face he didn't remember, and a haunted look in her eyes. For a moment, Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. Then he remembered the day she had walked out on him, the casual cruelty with which she had shattered their life together. His resolve hardened. "Ethan," Olivia said as she slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you for meeting me." I didn't know who else to turn to. Ethan kept his face unreadable. "What do you want, Olivia?" She began to spill a story of betrayal, regret, and manipulation, how Chase had used her, how she had gotten in over her head with the real estate deals. Her eyes glistened with tears as she spoke of missing him, of wanting to make amends. Ethan nodded in all the right places, offering sympathetic sounds while his phone recorded every word. "And the offshore accounts," Olivia continued, her voice low and urgent. "Chase claimed it was just tax optimization, but I knew something wasn't right. I should have stopped it, but I was too scared. Ethan, I didn't know what to do." And now Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Olivia reached out, grabbing his hand. Ethan forced himself not to pull away. "Now, I want to fix it," she pleaded. "Please, Ethan, help me. We could start over, be together again." "I still love you," words that would have once pierced his heart now felt hollow. He looked at the woman he had loved for 15 years and felt nothing, no anger, no love, not even hate, just a profound emptiness. "I'll think about it," he said, rising from the booth. "I need some time." As he walked out of the cafe, leaving a tearful Olivia behind, he felt lighter. He had the last piece of the puzzle. It was time to end this. The early morning stillness was shattered by the sound of splintering wood as FBI agents stormed Chase Blackwood's mansion. Inside, chaos erupted as agents swept through the rooms, seizing computers, files, and anything that might hold evidence of financial crimes. Clad in his silk pajamas and monogrammed robe, Chase could only watch in stunned disbelief as his meticulously constructed empire unraveled. "This is a mistake," he blustered, puffing out his chest. "Do you have any idea who I am? Who I know?" The lead agent, a no-nonsense woman with steely eyes, raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Blackwood, we know exactly who you are. That's why we're here." As Chase was led away in handcuffs, his eyes met a familiar figure standing across the street, Ethan Caldwell. Hands in his pockets, Ethan watched silently. For a brief moment, comprehension dawned in Chase's eyes. quickly replaced by helpless rage. Ethan turned away, leaving Chase's muffled curses fading in the distance. Meanwhile, across town, a similar scene was unfolding at Olivia's apartment. She went quietly, her head bowed, all fight drained from her as the police car drove off. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Maya Patel watching from her car, a blend of pity and disgust on her face. At the aquarium, Ethan arrived to find the place in chaos. The staff was huddled in small groups, whispering anxiously. Dr. Chin intercepted him at the entrance to his office, her expression somber. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, ushering him inside. "The fallout from the Blackwood arrest has hit us hard. The resort project accounted for a significant part of our funding." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. In his pursuit of justice, had he unintentionally put the aquarium and the marine life they protected at risk? Dr. Chin continued, her tone softening. "And there's more. Given your personal connection to the case, the board is questioning your position here. Some are even calling for your resignation." Her words struck Ethan like a physical blow. The aquarium had been his life, his passion, and now the thought of losing it, after everything else, felt unbearable. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted outside. They looked to see a group of his colleagues gathered around a computer, watching a news broadcast. Chase Blackwood was being escorted into the courthouse, shouting over his shoulder. "It was all her idea," he yelled, his eyes wild. "Olivia Caldwell, she planned everything. I'm the victim here." Ethan watched, a mixture of disgust and vindication rising in his gut. He had expected Chase to try and worm his way out of responsibility, but seeing it unfold was still unsettling. His phone buzzed a text from Zoe. "Check your email now." With trembling hands, Ethan opened his inbox. In his spam folder was an email from an anonymous address, attached with an audio file, the recording of his conversation with Olivia. For a long moment, Ethan stared at the screen. With one click, he could make sure Olivia faced justice. With one click, he could destroy what remained of her life. His finger hovered over the mouse when a knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. Maya poked her head in, her face flushed with excitement. "Ethan, you need to see this." She led him out to the main atrium, where a crowd had gathered. Local news crews were setting up their cameras, and a banner hung above the entrance: "Save RC's emergency fundraiser for coastal marine conservation." Dr. Chin appeared beside him. "Word got out about our funding crisis," she explained. "The community has rallied behind us. They're calling you a hero, Ethan, the man who exposed corruption and saved our coastal habitats." Overwhelmed, Ethan stood there as cameras flashed and reporters called his name. A surreal detachment settled over him. This wasn't how he had envisioned the end when he first set out on this path of revenge. He glanced around at the hopeful faces of his colleagues, saw the admiration in their eyes. Then he thought of Olivia, of Chase, of the lives he had ruined. In that moment, Ethan realized he was at a crossroads. He could embrace this new role, using his newfound influence for good, or he could take that final, vengeful step and ensure Olivia paid the ultimate price for her betrayal. The choice would define not only his future but the man he would become. At Logan Airport's international terminal, the usual chaos buzzed with travelers dragging suitcases and talking into phones. Amid the bustle, Chase Blackwood moved with determination, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Freedom was within reach. A private jet was waiting on the tarmac to whisk him away to a country with no extradition. All he needed to do was pass through security. A small smile crept across Chase's face as he approached the checkpoint. He had planned for this scenario and had hidden assets the authorities didn't know about. He would rebuild, come back stronger than ever, and when he did, Ethan Caldwell and everyone who had crossed him would pay. "Passport, please," said the TSA agent said, extending her hand. Chase reached into his jacket, exuding confidence, but then he froze. His passport was gone. So the agent asked, her brow furrowing as Chase frantically patted his pockets. No passport, no ticket. Both were missing. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. Charles Blackwood, a stern voice asked, "FBI. You're under arrest for attempting to flee prosecution." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Chase's eyes darted around the terminal. Near a gift shop, he spotted Noren, the private investigator, giving him a smug, satisfied wave before vanishing into the crowd. Across town, in a small, bare interview room, Olivia sat with her head in her hands. Her lawyer, a nervous-looking public defender fresh out of law school, shuffled papers. "Miss Caldwell, I've reviewed the evidence against you. It's overwhelming. The prosecution is offering a plea deal, but it still involves significant jail time. Olivia barely heard him. Her mind raced, searching desperately for an angle, a way out of this nightmare. The door opened, and Ethan walked in. Olivia's heart leapt for a moment, but her hope evaporated when she saw the cold determination in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice small. Ethan sat across from her and placed a manila envelope on the table between them. "I'm giving you a choice," he said, sliding the envelope toward her. With trembling hands, Olivia opened it. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by Ethan, and a USB drive. "That drive contains the recording of our conversation at the cafe," Ethan explained, his voice flat. "You admitted to everything, Olivia. The money laundering, the insider trading, all of it." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. "Ethan, please." "I was desperate." I didn't mean to stop. Ethan's voice cut through her plea like a knife. "I'm not here for excuses. I'm here to offer you a deal. Sign the divorce papers and plead guilty, and I won't turn over the recording. Try to fight this, try to manipulate your way out, like always, and I'll make sure the judge hears every word." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "You'd really do that to me?" After everything we've been through. For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped. She saw the pain, the internal struggle. But then it was gone, replaced by resolve. "You did this to yourself, Olivia. To us. I'm just making sure justice is done." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "You have until tomorrow to decide. Choose wisely." As Ethan walked out, leaving a broken Olivia behind, he felt a swirl of emotions: relief, sadness, and even a touch of regret. But mostly he felt free. Outside the police station, Ethan spotted Zoe waiting for him. "It's done," he said with quiet finality. Zoe gave him a long look, studying his face. "You okay?" Ethan paused to consider her question. "I will be," he finally replied. "What now?" Zoe grinned, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. "Now, we turn this mess into something good." The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind. Ethan was thrust into the public eye as the whistleblower who had exposed corporate fraud and saved crucial marine environments. The aquarium's fundraising campaign, with Ethan reluctantly at the forefront, became a resounding success. News soon followed that both Chase and Olivia had accepted plea deals, meaning they would face prison time, though in Ethan's mind, it wasn't enough. But to his surprise, the news didn't impact him as deeply as he thought it would. He was ready to move forward. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan stood on the beach near the aquarium, watching as the sun rose over the horizon, casting the sky in stunning shades of orange and pink. Off in the distance, he saw the buoys marking the boundaries of the newly established marine protected zone, a direct result of his battle against Chase's resort project. Breathing in the salty air, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. The past year had been a storm of pain, betrayal, and revenge, but as he stood there, welcoming the dawn of a new day, Ethan felt something unexpected: hope. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice came from behind him. Ethan turned to see Maya approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one, and they stood together in a comfortable silence, watching the sunrise. "The new conservation project is really taking off," Maya said after a moment. "We've had interest from marine biology programs all over the country. They want to collaborate, send students for hands-on experience." Ethan nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "It's more than I ever imagined when we began this." Maya turned towards him, her expression sincere. "You did good, Ethan. Despite everything, you did good." Ethan met her gaze, noticing the warmth and admiration there. For the first time in months, he felt a flutter in his chest that wasn't tied to anger or revenge. "We did good," he corrected softly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, without all of you." As they stood together, with the sun climbing higher, Ethan felt the last remnants of his old life, his pain and bitterness, slip away. He turned to Maya, a newfound determination in his eyes. "There's something I need to do," he said. An hour later, Ethan sat in a bland government building, facing a stern-looking FBI agent. "Mr. Caldwell." The agent began, "We've received some intriguing information, anonymous tips that were crucial in building our case against Blackwood and your ex-wife. We believe those tips came from you." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding but his voice calm. "Yes, that's correct." The agent leaned in slightly. "We're offering you the chance to come forward officially. Your testimony could be critical in ensuring justice is fully served." Ethan hesitated. Stepping into the public eye could mean unwanted scrutiny, possibly endangering the new life he was creating. But as he thought about the harm Chase and Olivia had caused not only to him but to the community and the environment he knew what had to be done. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "Whatever you need." The following weeks were a blur of depositions, interviews, and court hearings. Ethan's testimony made headlines, painting a stark picture of corporate greed and environmental degradation. Throughout it all, he found strength in unexpected places. His colleagues at the aquarium rallied around him, and Maya remained a steady, supportive presence. Even Dr. Chin, who had once cautioned him about letting personal matters interfere with work, now looked at him with newfound respect. As the legal process drew to a close, Ethan immersed himself in his marine conservation initiative. The project, born from the collapse of Chase's failed resort, focused on preserving and restoring critical coastal ecosystems. One evening, as Ethan worked late at the aquarium, he received an unexpected visitor, the lead FBI agent from the case. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, offering her hand, "I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation. Your testimony was essential in securing convictions." Ethan shook her hand, emotions swirling within him. "I'm just relieved justice was done," he replied quietly. The agent nodded. "It was. And I thought you should know the judge took your environmental report into account during sentencing. Blackwood and your ex-wife were given additional time for the ecological harm they almost caused." As the agent left, Ethan sat back in his chair, letting the news sink in. It was over. Finally, truly over. The next morning, Ethan found himself on the beach once more, this time surrounded by eager marine biology students, the first group participating in his new conservation program. Their enthusiasm was contagious as Ethan led them along the shore, pointing out species and explaining the delicate balance of the coastal ecosystem. He felt a sense of purpose stronger than he had ever known. The sun had fully risen, its warmth banishing the last of the morning chill. As Ethan gazed out over the water, he noticed a pod of dolphins playing in the waves. A genuine smile spread across his face, unforced and full of joy. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Caldwell felt at peace. The vendetta that had once consumed him had transformed into something greater, something that would leave a positive mark on the world. Turning back to his students, ready to share more of his knowledge and passion, Ethan knew that this moment, this purpose was what he had been searching for all along. Not vengeance, but redemption. Not destruction, but creation. The journey had been painful, the cost steep, but standing on the brink of a new chapter, Ethan wouldn't change a thing. He had found his path. This is where our story concludes. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel and click on the video on your screen. I'll see you there.